Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. My guest today is my old friend and tremendous guy, Will Dyer, who's lead pastor at First Baptist Church here in Augusta, a kindred spirit who I love to have conversations on government, on music, and any other thing under the sun that you can think of. He is truly a dynamic pastor and a dynamic leader for our community and for the rest of the state. I hope we're going to be able to keep him, but I just sometimes don't know that he's not going to get snapped up and taken away. But Will, thank you, and man.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
You are my first in-person guest of the year.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And I'm blushing from all your kind words. Thank you. Thank you.
It's all true. And
Thanks,
I'm like,
man.
it's funny. I've often said when the former mayor of Augusta and the head pastor at First Baptist meet occasionally in the afternoons for a glass of wine or a libation, things have changed a little bit around our city.
Just a touch.
Just a touch.
But I think it's becoming maybe all that it could be and will be in the future.
It is. And, but I've loved supporting new generations of leaders, yourself included. And I think so often, I spoke at Georgia College for their leadership forum, annual leadership forum recently, and I'm like, okay, sometimes generations in front will try to hold back the generation behind them because they might perceive it as a threat or whatever. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm like, I'm trying to expedite the process of having the new generation get into decision-making positions, because it's so often in leadership, and I'd love to get your take on this, people just hold on way beyond their shelf life. I'm reminded of our presidential race this year.
Yeah. So I consulting with a church recently, and they had gotten rid of their senior pastor. They're looking for a new pastor. And in the meantime, they had just been in steep decline.
Yeah.
And I will never forget this. I'm talking to a guy on the search committee, and he said, we loved our former pastor. He just stayed 20 years too long. Which I'm like, that's on you guys.
Yeah.
You had the ability to make a change, and you didn't.
Yeah.
Now, what's the correlation between that conversation and maybe a national political conversation? I don't know. Maybe we'll get there.
Yeah, but it is true. And I'll tell you, Will, there are a lot of people that said, well, you should have been mayor for life. And I'm like, no, I shouldn't have been. That's not what we want, is people to... Joe Riley, my mentor in Charleston, he was mayor for about 30 years and did a great job. But I'm like, you want a turnover. You want new blood and new ideas. And so I'm like, I should have never been mayor for life. But one of my role models, or one of my heroes, was George Washington.
Yeah.
Because they offered him, they called him the American Cincinnatus. They offered him the opportunity. And so Cincinnatus was a figure in, I believe it was Rome, that basically was a farmer, came in, took power, did his time in leadership position, went back to his farm.
Yeah.
Which is basically what Washington did. They offered him the opportunity to be basically president, and he left.
Yeah.
He didn't do that. And so I'm like, that was sort of my thing. People were like, well, you don't want to be governor or anything? I'm like, no, I did it for a season of service, not to advance myself politically. But it's interesting. And I want to get your take on this, because we talk politics a lot.
Sure.
And I think I've shared with people that I think there are a lot of people that offer themselves for public service and run for office with the best of intentions. But it's like there are a lot of people that say, well, I'm going to go to Washington for a couple of years, and then I'm going to come back. And then end up getting in Washington, and they don't come back anytime soon by any means. But what are your thoughts on that?
I'm reminded of the movie we all watched when we were in middle school, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, right? And I still want to believe, right? what did Lincoln call it? The better angels of our nature.
Better angels.
That there is still something inside of us that is good, and that there are enough people. I really do believe this. There are enough people who want to go to Washington, who want to go to the city council in Augusta, who want to serve, not with personal ambition being at the forefront, but with making the world, our community, our nation, whatever level it is, a better place. I don't know what it is that causes us to shift, right? I mean, I think my wife asked me this the other day. She said, when pastors get into church work, so often you see them get into it for one reason, and then over the course of years, they shift.
Yeah.
And it becomes about building a mega church or making a certain amount of money or publishing a certain amount of books. What is it that causes us to go from why we did this in the first place to it becoming really about us? I don't think I know the answer to that question, Deke. But
I'll give you my take on that. And I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, please, I love it.
But so when I ran for mayor, I had been a small business owner. I had run a nonprofit. I had chaired boards of directors, and so I had even though I was 37 years old, I had been in leadership positions.
Yeah.
So this wasn't. I didn't view it as that this is the highest I'm ever going to go. But I think some people, particularly if they hadn't been in leadership positions, and then they, start running a big entity or organization or a city or a church, I think somehow they can oftentimes become insular. And so they may shift, but they might not really know how much they're shifting.
Okay. So when Jesus is starting his ministry, there's a story that he goes into the wilderness for 40 days and he's tempted by the devil. And the first thing that happens is he's hungry. So take this bread and take this stone and turn it into bread. God wouldn't want you to go hungry. But then the second thing is he takes him to the pinnacle of the temple and he says, jump down from here. And if you are God's son, then the angels will save you. So it's about influence. Right? Look, people will see you. People will know you. And then the final temptation, he takes him to see everything there is, and he goes, this is all mine. And if you'll bow down and you'll worship me, I'll give it to you. It's about power.
Yep.
So there's something seductive about power. There's something seductive about influence, right? And the trick to it all, and maybe the way to avoid it, is to remember the answer to the question, because the primary temptation of Jesus, when Satan says, if you are God's son, and if he forgets for a moment who he really is, then he's susceptible to giving in to the influence and the power. But if you remember your identity, if you remember who you really are, maybe you can resist the urge to go somewhere with one purpose and forsaking it for the other. I don't know, man.
No. I'm loving this, but that is what I see is elected office or leadership positions are fraught with temptation. But what I've seen is, so from my perspective, I made sure never to set myself above the people I served.
Yeah.
I'm like, I was going to the Y every morning. I was going to the grocery store, going to Lowe's on the weekend, because I'm like, that's a dangerous place to be when you get in a silo or you get, disconnected from the people you serve. So I'm like, I'm going to stay active at the grassroots level all the time, because that way the pulse of the community you're serving. But there is a temptation, once you get in the halls of power. But I'll give you a great example, Will, that I always use for people. So my father was a CEO here of a corporation called Columbia Nitrogen. It was a fertilizer company. It's now potash.
Okay.
It's out on the river. But so my dad grew up on a farm. So he loved to garden. So, I'm 4 or 5 years old, and so my dad orders a load of compost so he can develop a vegetable garden, so he can plant a vegetable garden. So somebody left a brand new wheelbarrow with that load of compost, and my dad sent it back. And so I'm like, I'm a little kid, but I was like, Dad, why'd you do that? That's just people being nice. He said, son, just always remember this. Once you start taking things from people you don't know, it's a slippery slope. So the entire time I was in office, and I was blessed to have the resources to do this, I paid for my own gas. I never let a lobbyist wine and dine me.
Yeah.
I paid for most of my own travel expenses, but I'm like, I want to stay as far away from that line.
Yes.
Because it's the same thing. Once you start letting people as an elected official or as any leadership position wine and dine you and everything, you owe somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the temptation to remove yourself from everyday life, right? I still love seeing you at the Y when you're on the stair climber, just going after it, dude. I love it. I don't even talk to you when you're doing it because you're in the zone, but you're out with people, okay? So you have made sure not to remove yourself or whatever elected official it is. You are still connected to your people. And then the other thing, on the flip side, for church members or people that live in a particular district, to never forget that you are connected to the leader, to the politician, to the pastor,
Exactly.
whatever it is, and they are not above you, that you have the ability to influence policy, to influence direction. So it's a two-way street, right, where we can begin to think, one, that from the political side, from the leadership side, that we're better than, but then from the side of the people to think they're so far removed from us. What do I have in common with them?
Yeah.
How can I relate to them? No. We're all human beings trying to accomplish the same thing. We're solving the problems, Deke.
Yeah, no, we are. But I'll tell you, and well, it gets into this. So I analyze this stuff, and the greatest servant leader that ever walked the face of the earth is Jesus.
Hello.
Who never put himself. He was out there on the street with the people.
Right.
He didn't have a place to lay his head.
Right.
He was born, in a manger.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody was telling me about, they were watching one of the news shows about, but was it you that was saying that, so I had to shovel out the manger so that Jesus could be born in it? I can't remember.
No, I haven't heard that.
But said it was just so poignant for them. Not sure that was not in the Bible, but that shows you what he was born into.
Yeah.
But two, it's, just having that connection is so good. Oh gosh, where am I going with this? I'm on such a roll. But you've got to be able to, here again, so I was speaking to the National Governors Association. That's where I was going with this. And I told them, so they've got a great program called Disagree Better.
Okay.
Where they're getting Democrat and Republican governors and mayors to do public service announcements saying, we don't agree on everything politically, but we do agree that we need to work across party lines. But I told all the governors in New Hampshire, I said, look, I do grassroots engagement. It is what I'm passionate about because I get energy from interacting with your average man or woman on the street. The Lord wired me in a weird way.
Well, and you're good at it.
No, well, I mean, I enjoyed going through chemotherapy for those reasons. So I am a little strange, a little different. But I said, I get, you men and women, you can't do that, because there's a security issue that you can have, public meetings or whatever. But is that, unless you do an undercover boss like thing where you get disguised and you go out and talk to your constituents. Mm-hmm. But I said, but there are people that, so in Beowulf, I'm going to get you on this one.
Here we go.
In Beowulf, they were called, so I just read a great book called Culture Care by a guy named Makoto Fujimura.
Okay.
So he compares, he's a Christian, and he talks about, faith and art and everything. But in Beowulf, they were called Mirkstappas. It was border roamers.
Okay.
People that would go out, and so Stryker in Lord of the Rings, he labels him, but people that go to the extremes and can mix in different groups and then bring information back.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so I said, you guys can't do that, but I can. And there are people throughout this room that it's not a political rally, but they can tell you what the general public is actually thinking.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, the general public is not thrilled with what they're seeing out of Washington.
No.
But I think so often, Washington is its own bubble.
Yeah.
That how do they know you're supposed to be there to serve the will of the people? If you're never around the people or aren't around people who know what the will of the people is, how do you serve the will of the people?
Jesus, the best servant leader of all time. There's a moment in one of the Gospels where he says to his disciples, he said, birds have their nests and foxes have their dens, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Yep. All right. Now, if you want to put that in its context, Herod the Great was called by Jesus a fox, a cunning, sly sort of character who's doing whatever he can to get his way. And a bird, the royal symbol of the Roman Empire, was what? An eagle. Mm-hmm. So Jesus is explicitly contrasting the way that the world, the way that culture is going to lead, right? Hey, the eagle has his nest and the fox has his lair. He has his den. So they're not going to be with you. But I am grassroots. I have nowhere to lay my head. I'm here amongst the people. So, Deke, I want to push back for a second. And when we talk about our politicians not being able, or megachurch pastors, or whatever it is, not being able to interact with their people, understand their issues and complicating factors. But at the end of the day, if we can't have relationships with the people that we're serving at any level, man, we're in a bad spot.
Well, I have a devotional that I happen to love dearly, which incidentally, I had mandatory training for Development Authority board members in Madison, Georgia last week. And I took my trusty devotional, only to find when I arrived home that cough syrup had spilled all over it.
Uh-oh.
But, so I share this with people regularly, had the presence of mind, so for any of our listeners or viewers, I stuck it in the microwave, like 3 or 4 rounds, and dried it, well enough to where the pages don't stick together. So I salvaged the devotional. But here's one for you. This was my devotional this morning. The reading is the verse of Jeremiah 18 through 20. You might know, I don't, but misunderstood. Quote, men and women who try to side with the dispossessed and bear witness to God in Latin America must accept the bitter fact that they will inevitably be suspect. Unquote. Gustavo Gutierrez. Yeah. So this is I just want to get your take on this because I'm like, this kind of gets into what we're talking about. Following Christ is often a bittersweet experience, for doing what he asks us doesn't always lead to success or happiness. In walking the costly road of discipleship, we don't always see the fruit that we expect, and we certainly will not always be kindly thought of by our peers. In engaging in a ministry to the outcasts of society, we ourselves may well experience rejection. This will certainly occur when, through our solidarity with the poor, we call for change. And if that call for change involves a change of values as well as of the system, we can easily be regarded as troublemakers or traitors. Reflection: Jesus was regarded as a troublemaker in Israel. For this he was crucified. Those who truly follow his example will come into conflict with the powers that be.
Yeah. In the Sermon on the Mount, right? Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I don't take it for granted that everybody that's listening to you is a Jesus person at all.
No.
But Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, right at the very beginning, he says, blessed are you when you are persecuted and people speak all sorts of things against you falsely on my account, because they did it to the prophets before you. They did it to me. And he said, yours will be the kingdom of heaven. Nobody says that following the Jesus way is going to be easy.
No.
Now, there is this perversion of faith that says if you follow Jesus, you're going to get all the things that you want, which isn't Christianity. It isn't faithful to Christ. But the reality is, it is the best way to live, to serve, to love, to remember that every single human being, no matter what, is created in the image of God. And at the end of the day, it will mean that we're hated by certain people. It will mean that not everybody's going to love us. For Jesus, it meant he went to the cross, but thanks be to God, right? On the third day, there's resurrection. And if we are empowered by his Spirit to go do good work, man, let's do it, baby.
Yeah, man, and I'm so glad I have you on today. So last week, I'm a part of this just group out of Europe that's like a mastermind group kind of, but our speaker was Howard Bahar, who is the former CEO of Starbucks. Howard is 80-something years old now. And so he has lived his life as a servant leader. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, I'm not going to tell you that servant leadership is going to make you happy all the time, but I will tell you it is the most fulfilling way to live your life, to serve others, which I totally agree. But I asked him a question, and I've posed this question. I don't think I posed it on here, but I said, okay, Mr. Bahar, let me ask you this. But what about in a world where traits of a good servant leader, empathy, compassion, kindness, all of these things, and basically the fruits of the Spirit, in a lot of sectors by the world are portrayed as weakness.
Right.
And it's like, no, that's strength. That is not weakness.
That's right.
But it's it's the narrow gate. I mean, it's not easy to walk that. But I'm like, it's just so much. It's a good thing to serve others.
Right.
And it is fulfilling, and it might not make you millions and millions of dollars that you being the winner on whatever the reality show is, but it's more fulfilling. And at the end of your life, I think it's easy. Do you want to look back and tell your grandkids, yeah, I was the Bachelor. I was on The Bachelor. And I was the guy. I mean, that to me,
Right. What did he say? What was his answer?
He said, I don't know about your politics, but what we're seeing in politics is not servant leadership.
Right. Yeah. I can't remember if we talked about this last time, and it was long enough ago that we can talk about it again. But a book written a few years back by David Brooks, who just came out with a new book we'll talk about in a minute, I'm sure. But David Brooks talks about resume virtues and eulogy virtues, and that idea that we have resume virtues. And both of these things are necessary in order to construct a life. But the resume virtues that we what have you done? What have you accomplished? What are the things that people celebrate publicly? He said those are all fine and good. But the reality of a life well lived consists not of resume virtues, but of eulogy virtues.
Yep.
What are people going to say about you when you die? He was kind. He was generous. He was so filled with goodness and generosity and grace. Those are the characteristics that make a life well lived. And I can tell you as a pastor who stands over people's bodies and lays them into the earth, at the end of the day, what you accomplish in this world doesn't matter nearly as much as we think it does.
No.
I don't say they don't matter at all, but it doesn't matter as much as we think it does. But what does matter is how you treat other people.
Totally agree. And, that just gets me because I'm like, it's just, what the world is teaching us, not particularly, the youth. If you've got 500,000 followers on TikTok or you get so many likes, I'm like, that is saccharine. That's ethereal. It's here one day and gone the next. But I and you've performed a lot of funerals. I've been to a lot of funerals. I've never heard anybody at any funeral go, this guy was the richest guy I ever knew.
Yeah.
I've heard talk about success, but it's never been like, he had more houses and more. That's just never what seems to be talked about at funerals.
I did have someone say to me a few years back, we're walking out of the funeral, and he comes up beside me, puts his arm around me, and he said, I wish I knew that guy you talked about in there.
Well, but it does, after my dad passed at the visitation, I had people that worked for him come up and go, your dad, he would come out and walk the floor with us and talk to, the rank and file employees. And I'm like, that's sort of him being my true north. And obviously being a believer, but I'm like, that was who my dad was.
Yeah.
And I saw how much the people that worked for him loved him. And I'm like, I would, it's Machiavellian. I would rather be feared than loved. I'm like, not me.
No way, man.
I would way much rather be loved, because that stands the test of time. And for people to say nice things about my dad after he passed, I'm like, that's just something that keeps on giving. It's just the man that he was, that he made an impression. And I think I've got 11 great nieces and nephews now. And I'm like, so I don't have any kids. I've got plenty of kids in my life, but I'm like, I think about them and I'm like, that's exactly it. What will people say about their uncle when I'm not around anymore? And the last year dealing with cancer, I thought a lot about that.
Yeah.
But it is, it's just, what is really fulfilling in life? And it's not. So you'll appreciate this. I had a minister one time when I was living in Beaufort, South Carolina, or Episcopalian priest, He said, so basically, so worldly things are like, stuff that you just eat quickly and it fills you up, and an hour later you're hungry again.
Right.
He's like, that's worldly things. He's like, what the spiritual things keep you full.
100%, right? I preached about this yesterday, how in the culture that we live in teaches us that we have wealth, we have accumulation, we have money, and we do things with money, right? But the reality is, if you look at what Jesus teaches, what Paul teaches, what faith teaches, what most of the great traditions teach, whether it's Buddha or the rabbis, they would say that money does something to us, wealth does something to us. And so if we don't have our spiritual grounding in the things that ultimately matter, we can get caught up in the accumulation of wealth, the accumulation of followers. How much are we getting on TikTok? How much? And then we think life consists of that. And bringing it full circle, what we have begun to do as a culture is we've been doing it for a while. We value those characteristics. So we elect our representatives. We vote for our presidents based off of how famous they are rather than the content of their character.
Yeah.
We got work to do.
Yeah, we do. I'm out there doing it, man. But that's it's funny, and I'll tell you this, Will. I mean, I've given away a lot of work product for free for a long, long time, but it seems like things are starting to come full circle, I guess. But I'm like, Lord, thank you for, thank you for blessing me with the resources that have allowed me to do what I've done with my life.
Yeah.
Because they're yours, they're not mine. I'm like, it's hard to tell somebody, I'm not really focused on making a profit. I think that'll come if I do good work in the long run. That's kind of counterintuitive to a lot of people. And I'm following God's call on my life, which isn't always the most profitable thing in the world.
Yeah.
But I'm like, Lord, and thank you for making my endeavors spiritually prosperous. It's like to go and give talks and to give encouragement and to give people hope, or people are complimentary of listening to these conversations. Yeah. But I said, if it is your will, I would pray that you would make my business endeavors financially prosperous, if it is your will. And if it is your will that should happen and there's an increase my giving spirit with that increase, and show me where to invest it to build your kingdom on earth.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but the same thing. I think things are about to really start taking off with a lot of the stuff I've been working on for years and years and years. And I'm like, the testimony he gave me last year, bringing me through cancer, that's something that's a story worth sharing, and it's all glory to him.
Yeah.
But I'm like, Lord, keep me wise and humble. Please don't let the praise go to my head nor the criticism to my heart, and keep me always grounded in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my mentors told me once, he said, "We'll never forget that you are not as good as people say you are."
Mm.
And then he said, "But you're not as bad as people will say you are either."
No.
And to think, Lord, continue to work in my life so that you can do the work you're doing right now. We're talking before we go live, and you're spending this time investing in emerging leaders. And we talked about the growing gap between our elected officials and the age of our population. It's staggering to me.
It is, and I'll tell you, Will, I just had another guest, Wendy Swanson, on, who does a lot of leadership, leader building and everything. But she said, so she goes all over the world. She's in Russia and all this stuff. But she said it is striking to her. She's probably about my age. She said when she's doing leadership training, how when she asks for somebody, that the people that she's training, give me an example in your life. Who is your role model as a leader? And she said, it is scary how many people cannot give one example.
Not kidding.
One. No, not one. And so then she said, and then I'm like, well, who would you hold up, in the world, hey, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, whoever. But she said, it's just amazing to me, particularly the younger generation, they can't name one person. And but that goes to the gap that you're talking about. Because, I mean, we talked the last time you were on here, and every day I thank the Lord for, I'm like, all the faith leaders he has brought into my life along the way. And I mean, that's from rabbis to ministers to priests across the board. But another one, you and I had a professor at the University of Georgia, Will Power, professor of religion.
That's right.
That guy made such an impression on me, but I'm like, all of these people that, as I say, whether it was rabbis, whether it was Will Power, whether it was priests, but all of these people contributed to me growing spiritually, and they were. I looked up to them.
Yeah, becoming who you are. And then you talk about your dad is kind of the true north. And I think for me, as I am watching my girls grow, and I'm watching my daily, the rhythms of my life are changing. It is so easy to get caught up in thinking our goal is to make a difference in my work or in my church or in this city. But I will tell you, one of the things I am dead set on is that at the end of the day, I want my girls to be able to say, I was the best dad I could possibly be.
Yep.
Right? Because if I've been a good dad to them and I've showed them what it is to be a good husband, to be a good father, to be a good human being, then I've set them up in a position to where they can thrive. And to hear you talk about how your dad was that true north for you, the guy that you could look to and say, hey, I want to live my life like that. That's how we cultivate leaders. Ultimately, I'm serious, man. I know I sound like a old man, but I think the cultivation of leadership truly begins in the most rudimentary and basic of places, which is our home.
Oh, I totally agree. And as I say, 11 great nieces and nephews.
Yeah.
Most of whom are teenagers now. But, I want to continue to build my relationship with them because I've got a role to play in their life. And when my oldest brother died, my sister-in-law said, you're going to be the guy for these, be the older person in their lives. But to this point, they're such amazing young people, and they're good kids. They're smart. They're kind. And I'm like, just let me continue to build on that because you're right. And I'm like, what impact? So there's 11 of them, and they all know each other, and they all interact. I'm like, so what good can that group of 11 kids from our family, just hopefully raised in the right way, what good can they do in the world?
Yeah.
And it's pretty amazing to think of that.
Yeah. So maybe it's not as hard as we want to make it out to be. Right. If we're going to raise up the next generation, it starts in the most basic of places. And I think about even in my own neighborhood, which is off Walton Way.
Yeah.
There's a little guy on my street, and he's 10 years old, and his dad's not around right now. And every day when I pick up my girls from school, that little guy runs up and he gives me the biggest bear hug. And to spend time with him, just a few minutes, to say, you have value. You have worth.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, what difference does that make? And if we could take that sort of attitude and extend it beyond, children are easy to love.
Yeah.
But what if we could give that sort of love and that sort of generosity to people that we disagree with as adults, right? What if, let's go back to the leadership question. We actually took Jesus serious when he said, love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you. If you look at what's happening in our culture, and we just continually go to extreme polarities, and we talk about, every misstep a politician makes, there's someone waiting in the wings to vilify them, to talk about how bad they are, how to use language that is extremely angry and sometimes violent.
Yeah.
But what if we said, hey, wait a minute, Jesus tells me to love that person, and it might score me political points to cast hate.
Yeah.
But what does it do to my soul? To further the division and the rhetoric that is killing our culture and killing us inside, right? Yeah, maybe if we could approach everybody with that same sort of love that I'm giving to that little boy on the street.
And Will, I'm the guy that grew up thinking, why can't we all treat each other all year long like we do during the holidays?
Yeah.
So I'm still, I don't know that I'm naive. I'm just not jaded, and I still hope I'm not jaded. But I mean, that's the exciting thing to me about younger generations is they're not jaded yet. And there's a strength in not being jaded to this point. But you're exactly right. Yeah, my mom and dad taught me to treat everybody the same with dignity and respect, no matter what station they are in life.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's carried through with me, but it is just to show somebody attention that might not be shown attention most of the time. It's like Melissa and I, when we were taking our dog through treatment for her lymphoma and going to Columbia all the time, there were, right around the Capitol, there was a group of homeless guys, and we got to be friends with the homeless guys. Melissa gave them all Hoss T-shirts and everything. But it's just like to show them a little bit of compassion and a little bit of loving on them, just the countenance. I mean, the way that they would just light up. And I'm like, that's doing as much for me as it is for them, because you feel that connection point and that energy. And so I think that that's completely possible. And I think if you and I can get more people doing that, they will see what it's not the dopamine hit of getting a like on Instagram. It's way better than that, and way more fulfilling than that.
Yeah, and it is, as Eugene Peterson says, who's a great Christian writer, he says it's the Christian faith, or the things we've been talking about. It's a long obedience in the same direction.
Yep.
It doesn't happen overnight, but it is the consistency of a life that is rooted in something deeper than what our culture is currently selling us: likes, money, notoriety, whatever it is. So
and that's the thing, and we get into it. I'm like, I'm a Christian. I make no bones about it, but I don't begrudge anybody else their faith tradition or lack thereof. But I'm like, all the faiths, and you know better than more about religion, they're grounded in peace and love.
Yeah.
I mean, at the foundation, the core of, it's all there. I mean, we've changed them all around in different ways.
Sure.
But
I'm not going to jump on the soapbox for too long, right? But the beauty of living in the United States of America, we're a pluralistic country. We don't have a state religion. And so what you are able to see, if you look around with a posture of generosity, is that every faith at its core is trying to teach us something fundamental about the human condition.
Absolutely.
That it is rooted in that sort of grace. Now, I want to be clear on this, right? For me as a Jesus follower to say that the way of Muhammad or the way of Judaism or the way of Hinduism are all the same. No, they're not. They're not, and that's okay.
No.
But that doesn't mean we can't be friends.
No.
Right? That doesn't mean we can't learn from each other. And the great irony of what we're seeing now with the rise of Christian nationalism, right?
Yeah.
Is that it is neither Christian nor American in its posture. And yet it's taking on this great significance in American political life when it betrays the fundamental tenets of both Christianity and the American ideal.
Yeah.
Oh, man, sorry. I'm off the soapbox now.
but it's like, I will tell you, so Michael Johnson, who is the head of the Lebetsky Family Foundation, Daniel Lebetsky, the founder of Kind Snacks, founded Starts With Us, that I'm a part of.
Yep.
But so Michael, after I was diagnosed, he reached out to me and he said, we have a tradition in the Jewish faith to where we named the people we're praying for. He said, so my synagogue is naming you, people you've never met are praying for you.
Yeah.
And I'm like, thank you so much for sharing. But then after October 7th, I reached out to him and I said, I want you to let your synagogue know how much I appreciated, and I'm healing. And it's prayers. I don't care what faith you are, I'll take them.
Yeah.
But I said, I want you them to know that I'm praying for them. And he said, thank you so much for that, because he said, people forget how really, as compared to the population of America, the Jewish community is a very small population. And he said, sometimes we feel like we're forgotten.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's, and to see the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, to see the rise in anti-Semitism on both sides of our political party right now, it's really frightening because let's not even go from a faith perspective. Let's just talk about Israel is our closest ally and our only true democratic representation in the Middle East.
Yeah.
We owe it to them to be partners and friends and to say, hey, I'm praying for you. We care about you.
It's interesting, Will, and I just want to share this with you because once again, I'm out there I'm a border roamer and talking to people. But so Manu Meal, who's a good friend of mine who I mentor, who's the CEO of Bridge USA, and I've told you about them. They're on 60 college campuses, bringing together kids of differing political ideologies to talk about students. How do we solve the big picture issues facing America? I had a call with him, I think it was 2 weeks ago, but he said, you know what's ironic? He said, after October 7th, we have had more substantive discussions on college campuses with Jews and Muslims than we ever had before that. Said, but all you see in the media are protests or university presidents getting fired. You're not seeing that actually it's opened a door to where you have students that are actually coming together to discuss these issues.
Oh, dude, that's beautiful. That is beautiful.
Is that not amazing?
And what happens when you sit down to actually discuss things can be remarkable. Because when you sit across a table from someone and you hear their story, when you hear their perspective with no agenda other than we're going to listen to each other, right? True leadership, one of the greatest acts of leadership is to listen well.
Yeah.
And if we can sit across a table from someone that we disagree with and we can hear them, we're not going to emerge agreeing on everything, but I can assure you we are not going to walk away enemies.
No. Well, and I'll tell you, and, you know, I think the world of Daniel Lebetsky, but 22 years ago, he started a nonprofit in the Middle East called the One Voice Movement.
Okay.
So the idea was to bring together moderate Israelis and Palestinians to talk about how do we create peace and, you know, a Palestinian state. So, and I tell the story a lot. So they went to the Palestinians first and pitched the idea, and they said, okay, we'll join, but you'll never get the Israelis. So they went to the Israelis, and the Israelis said, we'll become a part of this, but you'll never get the Palestinians. So 22 years later, and leading up to what happened last year, they had 650,000 moderate people, Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East, signed on to the One Voice movement.
Dude.
And I mean, it breaks my heart for Daniel to have been working on that for decades and then to see what's happened there now. But here again, most people, I tell that, they're like, well, is that real? I said, yeah, but you've got a guy that had the wherewithal, but also was willing to take decades.
Yeah.
You know, and his father was a Holocaust survivor. So Kind Snacks, that was because his father said that there was one guard in the concentration camp that saw him as a person, as a kid, and would give him food. And that's basically how he survived. So he said, he treated me with kindness. Everything we do, we need to focus on treating others with kindness.
Yeah. It's true in the macro level, 650,000 people, and it's true on the micro level as well. One quick story, and I'll make this as brief as I can. I was in Israel in 2015 with one of my best friends, John, and a few others that were with us, and we spent the day in the old city in Jerusalem, touring all the sites, and we went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and we went here and there and everywhere. And at each spot we stopped at, I kind of thought, like, okay, this is fine, whatever.
Yeah.
And then John and I just decided to leave the tour, and we got lost. Literally, we got lost not in Old Jerusalem, but we wandered into the city. And there was a moment when a guy he's standing outside of his building, and he said, "Hey, are you Americans?" And, I'm like, I don't know, maybe. Maybe.
Canadian.
So, but my buddy John grew up as a missionary kid in Africa. And so he goes, "Yeah, we're Americans." And the guy goes, "Come on inside. Beer's on me." And it's a little bar. And I walk inside. John and I go in, And we sit down, and in that bar at the time, it was me, it was my buddy John, it was the owner of the bar, who's a Russian Jew, it's two waitresses, bartenders, one who is a Palestinian Muslim, and another who is a Jewish young lady living in Jerusalem. And 2.5 hours later, we got up and we walked out of that bar. And I'll never forget, because I looked at my buddy John and I said, of all the places that we have been on this entire trip, this was the most sacred moment. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, we sat around a table together and we shared a meal and we had a drink and we laughed and we told stories and we learned from each other. And if we can do that, man, I think maybe we can make some headway.
Well, that's what we're going to do, my friend.
Good.
But that is, here again, I mean, I think, that is the Lord at work.
Yeah.
And the Lord is still doing a great work throughout the world. It's just not, necessarily what is being focused upon in the mainstream media. But every day I'm like, Lord, thank you for beginning to remove the scales from my eyes, and please remove the scales from the eyes of your people so we can see what you want us to see, which is something that's what I think people would like to see, but so that we're not misguided or distracted by the illusions and the mirages that are constantly thrown up in front of us.
There's another story that's not being told that's far more hopeful, far more beautiful.
Well, I think that's I think that's a big part of why he kept me around.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, man, we could talk for days. We do talk for days. We get together. I mean, if we filmed every conversation we've ever had, I mean, we would have a library full of conversations.
I don't know if I'd have a job if we filmed every conversation.
I probably wouldn't. I'm still trying to figure out what I'd do when I grow up. I need to get a haircut and get a real job.
No,
I think
you're doing exactly what you need to be doing.
But man, I want to tell you, thank you first for being my friend, and then for being my guest, and for being a part of our community, being the father that you are, the dude that you are.
Thanks, Deke. I appreciate you, man. I always love getting to spend time with you, whether it's here or somewhere in Surrey Center.
Well, maybe next time we can bring some cold beverages.
Hey, there you go. I like that plan. That sounds good.
But so for our listeners and viewers, where can people find you?
Yeah, so
except for with me at Surrey Center.
Yeah, right. You can find me on Tuesdays at Surrey Center, or our church. We have our services streaming every Sunday. DiscoverFBC.org. I'm on Facebook, on Instagram. Don't do TikTok, and keep a relatively low profile on some of that stuff. But that self-promotion does not come naturally to somebody as we talk generational stuff. Millennials and Gen Xers like the Kurt Cobain. I don't want to be famous. It's absurd.
Yeah.
It feels icky, but I know it's part of it. Yeah. So maybe ask me next time. I'll have a better answer.
I got you. So what on a daily basis puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart? And I remember your last answer about your daughter being at the top of the stairs and singing "This Girl Is on Fire."
Dude, how about that? Oh yes, no, that does not happen anymore. Right now, it's still connected to my kids, right? But I go upstairs in the morning. We wake them up at 6:15, and my 5-year-old, I walk into a room and I say good morning, and every morning she takes her hands and she wraps them around my head, and she just bear hugs me until I legit think maybe I'm going to run out of breath. And it is the best way to start my day.
No, that is awesome.
Yeah. A thing that brings me maybe a tear to my eye or even still joy, and I said I'd mention it earlier, there's a book that I've recently read. It's called How to Know a Person. And it's written by David Brooks, the New York Times columnist He just that I mentioned earlier. He just came out with this book late last year, and it's an invitation to really dig deeper into the conversation that you and I have been having.
Yep.
How do we see people? Because if we can see people, then we're on a journey of discovery, not only for them, but for ourselves. And it's a book that as I've read it, I thought, this is great. And then finally, the last one, this is a more self-reflective book I've been reading. It's called A Life Well Lived, written by a guy named Miroslav Volf, and it's an invitation to explore questions of ultimate meaning and purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing? What does it look like to live a life worthy of your humanity? And as I read the chapter and I answer the questions, I found myself at times moved to tears with joy, but also moved to tears with this overwhelming sense of, I can do better than what I'm doing. And that's the best kind of thing to read. So I encourage you and anybody else to go pick that book up.
I will read those things. Well, I will part with this.
Okay.
So the last question I got at Georgia College's Leadership Forum was, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self? And I said, well, first off, I'd probably tell myself, stop drinking so much beer.
Yes.
Second, I would say, don't be in a hurry. You know, that in life, take a while to look around. I'm like, everybody says we're so busy, like it's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
But just the time that we take to have these conversations is gold. So thank you for, I might not have known that at 18 years old, and I was drinking a lot of beer, but thank you for being a great guest,
so
man.
Good. Thanks, Deke. Love you, man.
Love you too. That's all the time we got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.